all here? Meeting is now streaming live. Okay. So today is June 16th, 2020. This is the ad hoc Sped committee meeting. And the time is 5:04, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. Let me grab the agenda. We're going to go off agenda very quickly just because of a hard stop by the Sped Pack guests this evening. So I'm going to go out of order and move up the Sped Pack report, which was item number 5, after the approval of the minutes. So first, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Okay, so I'm going to second, and then we have to all in favor. Barbara, you and I. Right?
I do have.
You have discussion. Okay.
No, not just one edit in page 1, the last paragraph, strike the words "2 anxieties." I think it's just a typo. And that's it. Otherwise, I think we can call for a vote.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, unanimous.
So approved.
I know.
All right, so with the minutes approved, we can move to the Sped Pack report. And is it Jeff or Dave? Who's going to leave?
May I just say a few words before I turn it over to the current chair?
Sure.
Sure. So as this committee knows, our Sped Pack is one of 3 officially recognized councils in the state. And it was a goal of the departments to create a vehicle for collaborative, positive communication with families. And this has really been a labor of love. I want to publicly thank Jeff for the hours that he put in when common sense would have said, I've done it for years. And his leadership has really helped to establish a very strong council. And I really wanted to say thank you to Jeff and say thank you to David for what he is about to do. But I believe that we are in a very rare and unusual place within the state and certainly within the history of Norwalk. So I wanted to publicly thank Jeff before turning over the report to him.
Well, so there's going to be a mutual kiss butt society here, because one of the things that Yvette didn't say was that she was one of the major proponents of forming this council, and she sought out and actively instituted the creation of this council. So that's a lot to be said for her to come in. There was a lot of open wounds when she first came in here, and she did the best that she can, and she did a marvelous job at it of healing a lot of those wounds. And we're still in the healing process, and with her guidance, we're moving forward. So that's great. Anyhow, so so I wanted to thank her for that, for having done that. Also, what she said about, like, me and I shouldn't have done this. The thing that's most impressed me with the council is that it's a compilation of not only parents, but of educators of all stripes and statuses. We have special educators, we have teachers, we have a principal, and it's just amazing. It's beyond me that somebody would spend the entire time, in the school day doing this, and then voluntarily coming forward and helping out to do the council. I mean, we do it as parents, it's our kids, we love them, and that's what we do, But so I really have to applaud, the educators for coming forward. It's just amazing. It's amazing. Having said that, the way we're going to do this, Erica, and thank you for moving us up on the agenda. I know you have a lot of things to do, and we're going to speed this along. I just wanted to make that introduction, and the person who's going to be the chair next year, voted as Dave, is going to come forward, and he's going to just briefly outline for you the report. As you know, under our bylaws, we're required by the bylaws to do an annual report. We've done it. It was pretty difficult with the COVID, but we've got it a bit. And now, right now, I'm going to turn it over to Dave to give you a brief presentation on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. And I also want to echo the sentiments about Yvette's work on helping to get this thing pushed forward when CPAC came to them and said, you know, would you be willing to be the urban pilot for a program like this? And I think it has been, and I think it will continue to be a positive in the collaborative effort that it is creating amongst parents and community members, and then of course the educators who are giving their time to be a part of this. And what's most impressed me is that dialogue that has happened throughout this year. Jeff alluded to the fact that we kind of got stalled because of the COVID, which I think a lot of things have experienced that as well. So we started out in the fall with a bunch of roundtable discussions, broke off into groups, and came up with some areas of interest that we wanted to pursue and discuss throughout the year. We nailed it down to 2 areas, which you'll find in the report. We talked about communication and we talked about Iep compliance. When we looked at communication, and you all have copies of this report, so I'm not going to read verbatim what's in here. I want to hit on a couple of key points, and that is in communication, we identify areas of strengths and areas of challenges for the area of communication, and things that require, we looked at things that possibly require some improvement, and we draw some conclusions. One of the things that we did draw a conclusion on, but I think that that is actually by nature of the current situation that we're in has begun to improve, is the communication between the micro communication of the parents to their staff and to the staff and to teams. We've seen and heard from parents that during this time now where we're sort of stuck at home and we've been using Zoom, that there's been a lot of productive communication that has happened. I don't think we've perfected it by any means, but I think that it's a positive step forward, and I'm hoping that some of the lessons of COVID we can carry forward as we continue on our journey. One of the big things though that we did find is there's some language barriers that exist within the district, and those language barriers I think are important to be identified and addressed. That we do have a large minority population, we do have a large Spanish speaking and a fairly large Haitian speaking population. And we need to really look at that when it comes to the forms of communication. And that was one of the areas, and you'll note that we look at in there. We then delved into Iep compliance. We had a lot of discussions back and forth amongst the educators and the parents in this area. And one of the biggest things that I think came out of this is one of the challenges that require improvement are the inconsistencies in IEP writing. We found from school to school that they're written in very different ways, and trying to find what the system is from a PD standpoint, from a parent education standpoint, to make us all stronger in understanding what the IEP is, what that document is, how it travels with your child through his or her career, and how we can make it better across the board so that it is much more malleable document for the kids. We identify some other areas in there. Please feel free to look at the report. The biggest thing that I want to say is that because of COVID, we didn't do the dive as deep as I think all of us wanted to do, because once school got let out and we started to figure out what the distance learning model was, we really went back and had to look at our notes and talk about our earlier discussions, and our ability to follow completely through, I feel like, got stalled. To that end, the new executive council has been talking in the committee that probably communication is going to carry on in some form into our 2021 discussions, and IEP compliance is going to still be a part of it as we move forward. So we're really not done visiting these areas. And the biggest thing I think that we want to do, and we say this in the report, is we want to thank everyone that was involved. CPAC for their guidance in bringing us this idea and helping us create this council, the parents and the educators that gave of their times, and all of the parents and educators within the district who have been working so hard. So I want to say thank you for your time. Please, if you have any questions of the council about any of these items, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to talk. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And, I think while communication, I agree with you, has improved, I think at, even through general ed, some of the things that you talked about when I was in your meeting was consistency in how, like the platforms that we were using. So we talked about consistently using Dojo or Seesaw. So at least when you move from lower school to elementary school to middle school, you don't have to relearn a different platform or have one for a younger child and a second one for a child in middle school. So I think those themes transcend from SPED into general ed.
I agree completely with that. Yeah.
Barbara, did you have something as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I hope that we lean into their suggestion of the SPED open houses. I think that one of the things that's so hard for SPED parents is the confidentiality piece keeps you feeling isolated. And the more that we can find a way to have people feel safe in a community of supportive peers, in terms of parent-to-parent support, the happier our SPED community will be. So if we can, I don't know what the privacy issues are regarding an open house. If that, obviously would be an opt-in if the family feels comfortable doing that. But I think it's a fantastic idea, and we should do it if we can. And then, as I reflected on the piece about communication, I think Zoom is such an opportunity that you can have a 10-minute conference with all of these people without anybody having to commute to from central office to the school or whatever. So I think that we could use this platform to incrementally improve quick touchstone meetings to just adjust. It doesn't have to be like a full PPT, just I wanted to talk about this little thing that's troublesome and I don't want to wait 3 months to talk about it. So I hope we can use them that way to better hone our communications.
I think also on the micro level of, the special ed teacher or resource teacher to a parent, we found personally during this time that it was great to have that conversation in a face-to-face way rather than a quick phone call. There's something about being able to, look at the person that I think is important. And I think that this Zoom has helped that side of the communication rather than a note on a slip of paper.
Agreed. And I think it would help the parents too. I know as a SPED parent myself that, my husband takes a lot of time away from his job, and the hour that he spends driving to and from the school, he could better support our family and through his work. So I think in all cases, it will help us have that face-to-face interaction with as little lost time, because we know that every second of our staff's time is money as well. So,
anybody else on the committee have comments or questions about the report? I'll close out this agenda item just by saying that, we do still have the audit on the table that we weren't able to fulfill in the spring. We had to table it because it needs to be a public bid, opened in public with a team, but it is something that we'll revisit with Dr. Estrella. And compliance is a number of line items on that audit request, as well as caseloads, which I know was also in your report.
Erica, do you think that the timing of that will likely be spring of 21?
So we're looking to bring it forward in September. If we can do it get the RFP out in August for the work in September. I've also been able to work with Hanover around the caseload, and I'm hoping to have a report by the end of the month on caseload if they can deliver it. That was a small sliver of the larger deliverable that ad hoc requested.
Erica, I'm sorry.
No, go.
Can I just make one comment real quick? I would just encourage any parents that are listening, since this is a live stream, if you have any positives or concerns or questions, just to reach out to either the Board of Ed or to a vet, or anybody within the school, because I think sometimes we hear things secondhand, and I think it's always best if it's a firsthand account, and that includes positives. With my team, I always try and tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly, but especially the good as well, because it's real easy to say when something's been missed, and sometimes it was inadvertent, but even the positives, because there's a lot that's working. So anyway, that was the only comment I wanted to share for anybody that's listening.
Thank
I
you.
just want to make one final comment, and that's a special thank you to Jeff. Jeff is leaving the council now after starting it and doing a yeoman's job putting it together. And Jeff's been so involved in special education from a parent perspective in Norwalk for so long. And I just personally want to say thank you to him for all of his hard work.
Agreed. He builds things and then gives them on. Thank
Okay, well, thank you to Jeff. Thank you
And
to
thanks, let me just say thanks to everybody on the Board of Ed, everybody here, because you guys, your parents, you're doing all this, you're not getting paid for this, you're showing up. Barbara, everybody, just thank you so much. This is the good in Norwalk right here. We see so much of this stuff on Facebook of people tearing each other down. I mean, just take a look at this. Here we are. We're a bunch of people who are parents or educators or both. And we're, it's after 5 o'clock and we're showing up. This is the good of Norwalk. And that's why I want to emphasize this group right here is the good of Norwalk. So let's salute that.
Oh,
Agreed.
great. Thank you again, Jeff, and thank you, David, and the 21 members of the council, right? 21 still? Yep. Okay. And Barbara, yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to circle back. We got into the next thing, but I just wanted to circle back to the conversation of the timing of the audit. I'll be frank, I'm a little concerned about doing it in September because I don't know that so we know we only are going to do this every 3-4 years. And I want to make sure we do it right. And I'm a little worried that the ecosystem that they'll be studying is not the natural ecosystem. And I'm wondering if we might want to put it on pause until the vaccine, if as we determine that a vaccine might be available in January, it might be worth scheduling this more for January, February, and then look at the work in May. But obviously I defer to Dr. Estrella and Dr. Gorovich. I'm just a little worried about spending the money and not getting what we want out of it.
Given the deliverable that ad hoc asked and the request to open it up other than the usual people that usually do audits or reports, I think if we put it out in August, September, see who bids on it. It's a huge deliverable that was requested. Let's see what the bids come back. Can we afford all that was requested? Mm-hmm. And then we would be in a position to say, we want to report by November or January or May. Okay. Once we know who's bid and what the reality of our budget can support given all of the deliverables of the request.
Okay, I understand now. I thought you meant you wanted to start the audit in September. You want to start the bid in September, and then we'll do the audit when we are in a stable situation. Okay, I just don't want to spend money until we're sure we're going to get what we need out of it.
Correct.
No, that's fair. And keep in mind that the audit may take place in tiers based on what we can afford. So it's also just finding out what our budget needs to be.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else? No? Okay. I don't have to move to approve the report. No. Okay, great. So ESY status update.
Okay, thank you all. So Stacy is going to screen share. Much of this has been discussed. This is now the current as of this afternoon at about 1:30. And we have submitted our district's request for summer school and ESY. We are still working with the health department around the safety issues. Before I begin the report, I want the public to know, and certainly want ad hoc committee to know, that the health and safety of our kids and our staff and our community is forefront. So everything that we are doing, we are balancing FAPE and IEP needs and parent preferences with the gentle balance of what is health and safety, what are the health and safety protocols that should be put into place and that can be put into place. So please take this report understanding that's the balance we are looking to achieve. So let me first describe the models and what we did and where we're at, and then share with you the health and safety protocols. So as you see, ESY planning has taken place. IEPs have been written. And although we had hoped to start ESY earlier than July 6th, in a previous report to this group, we spoke about the possibility of June 15th. As you know, the governor has not authorized summer activities or summer school or school activities until July 6th. So that's where we are. We are planning a 5-week program. We are planning for 3 hours per day. For the pre-K students, ages 3 and 4, we are planning at NECC, and that will be 2 hours. I'm talking about in-person or remote, and I'll go into detail. We decided to go with the 2 hours for the preschool because we wanted to limit issues related to toilet scheduling and feeding and snack, and the other high contact possibilities with the really young kids. So option A is in-person, fully in-person, 3 hours a day. Initially, we were planning to be open in every school. Now that we got back parent preferences, Stacy will talk a little bit about what school sites we will be in. Staff classes will be staffed with a maximum of 10 humans. In the general ed program, it will be 9 students and 1 teacher. For special education, we are capping it at 8 so that there will always be a teacher and a para in the room. Where we have higher management needs, someone with a 1-to-1 para for management or health needs, then that class would be reduced by another child. Most of the classes are about 4 to 6 students max. So we can have 2 or 3 other adults in the room working with the children. Related services, because related service personnel serve so many kids, and one of the guideposts were to keep the contact as minimal as possible. So one group of kids with one group of staff members and not interchanging. We felt that placed our related service staff with caseloads of 20 kids or 25 kids at higher risk. So we will be doing counseling and speech remotely, either as a push-in to the 3 hours where it's appropriate on IEPs, or after the 3 hours in consultation with families for an additional half hour of service at the end of the day. And the IEP goals will be addressed to the greatest extent possible. We continue to understand that there may be some activities that we need to put on hold for safety reasons that may be related to an IEP. For example, I'm thinking about prompt therapy that requires manipulation of a child's mouth. Those just, there are some activities that just place the student and the adult in high risk. We are not serving breakfast or lunch. There will be a grab and go bag at the end of the session that will include lunch for the day and breakfast for the next morning. So every child will have the two meals. And bus transportation for ESY students is available upon request, and we do have data as to who made that request. And we did ask parents for, again, safety purposes, if you can bring your child to school, please do so, just to reduce the contact on the bus. Again, trying to keep groups of kids and groups of adults as cohesive and as possible. Option B for students recommended for ESY is a full remote program. And that is the same 3 hours a day. Today, Stacy and I and a group of educators were working on the daily schedule, what that will look like. A kid can be at home or a kid can be in school. The daily schedule is similar. And in fact, we've been talking about having the kids at home join a live group in school. Barbara, not dissimilar to what we were talking about. How do we, bring that blend in? And we're going to be working on that, particularly for some lessons. And that's the option B, completely virtual. Services will be for up to 3 hours a day with schedules based upon the IEP recommendations, and those schedules will be finalized in consultation with parents. What we learned through the phases of the school year was we needed to be a little more flexible with some of the Zoom scheduling, and we'll be looking to have those schedules finalized in consultation with parents. Option C is any student eligible for ESY. We need to remember that students with disabilities are general education students first. So all of those students are eligible and have been invited, to the most part, to participate in the summer academies. And the Summer Academies is the general education program. We will be providing special ed supports and SEL supports, and parents may opt into an integrated model with general ed students. And that is that ESY planning. Again, related services can be a push-in model or can be scheduled after the typical 3-hour school day. And again, those schedules will be finalized in consultation with parents. So we sent out letters 2 weeks ago. We got back virtually like 95% of the responses, or 90% back. In fact, the response rate was higher than it was in non-COVID years. And Stacy, if you can go through the data on the responses, I would appreciate that. Got to unmute.
Yep, I did. So for NECC, we, as Yvette said, sent out the survey, and parents chose whether they were going to be receiving online, in person, or if they were opting out of ESY altogether. So as you can see that we have 43 students who will be participating in online for preschool. We have 27 students who will be coming to NECC for ESY services. And we have 16 parents that opted out of ESY at the preschool level. For K-12, so this is our kindergartners through our transition age students, parents had 4 different choices, including the summer academy, as Yvette talked about in our options. We have 56 students who are attending in-person ESY. And so looking at that number as a totality between kindergarten and transition, we are running ESY classes at Norwalk High School, where our high school in transition will be. We will have a class, 2 classes at Roten and 1 class at Nathan Hale. Again, trying to keep the bulk closest to where they live and into cohorts and to determine classes. We have 3 sites at the elementary. We'll have 2 classes at Fox Run, 2 classes at Rowayton, and 1 class at Marvin. And so that's a total of 3, 4, 5, 6 sites that we're using at the K-12. We did have plus NECC. We have 123 students who are opting into online ESY. And so we are grouping those students and putting together classes. And as Yvette said, we're developing schedules to look at what those hours of instruction are, and to ensure that students are getting the reading, math, SEL instruction, just as though we are running online as if they were in person. So we'll be doing some additional training on staff, on live instruction. We really are looking at it as a class. We did have 18 students who opted out of ESY service. And then we had 35 students who also qualified for the summer academy and will be participating in the summer academy instead of ESY. We've worked with, overall, we're providing services and supports to students who are participating in summer academy, but we've made sure that these students who might have some more unique needs are getting their services or needs met through some alternate supports, just knowing that they might have a little bit more of a struggle.
All the students that opted into either in-person ESY or online ESY will have a half-hour daily social emotional learning opportunity. We'll be working with Rethink to implement the CASEL materials daily. And we are working with our social workers, psychologists, and school counselors to facilitate those SEL services at least once a week with the staff running those programs. Stacy, you want to describe what that is?
So this is a breakdown of the K-12 registration by sites, and looking at those that are sending their students to in-person ESY, online, or if they're going to the summer academy. As you can see, why we combined some of the sites, we had many that the in-person was 1 to, the most was Roten, where that's why we have 2 classes there. So that's why we did do some of that combination of the classes. And so the students were put with like peers to ensure that the instruction that's being provided is appropriate for them. And here is a breakdown of our transportation. And so when parents completed the survey and they said that they would be attending, it automatically asked them if they required transportation. So of that, we have 16 students at NECC who require transportation, 42 at K-12, and 4 out of the transition program. So we've been working with our transportation department, and I know Yvette's going to go over the health and safety protocols, but we've been working with Joanna to ensure that she has the buses and the staff. And while our preschool will obviously is its own separate building, our K-12 students who are, it's primarily our K-3 who are attending at the schools where Summer Academy is, they will be riding the bus together, so that they'll be sharing that transportation with them.
So perhaps we should stop here, see if the committee has any questions before we go on to the health and safety issues.
I have a few questions. The 232 is obviously a fraction of our SPED population. And you said 95% of the parents responded. What percent usually attends ESY?
The ESY numbers are slightly increased this year, not significantly. A few more kids, a percentage of kids were eligible. But it's consistent with prior years. The response rate is higher.
Okay.
So, we would
Okay.
send out letters and we would follow up, and parents would not necessarily tell us what their preferences were. So we, perhaps because of the medium, we got a very good response rate from all the eligible students.
Okay. And on the transportation, and I'm just moving my screen around to see the stats again. Do we got any long bus rides as part of us only doing a few sites?
We took that into account by where we grouped the kids. So we're, pretty much all over the city, and we tried to group it that way. We're going to be using, for the greatest extent possible, type 1 buses, the larger buses, limited to 12 kids on a bus with 1 para. So, the worst case scenario, it's not like there are 15, 20 kids on a bus that we're concerned about long rides. Once we get the bus runs from Joanna, we can look at that a little more closely. We'll have enough buses. If we need to add another bus for only 6 kids or 5 kids, we can do that.
Okay, and you feel good about 1 para to 12 kids based on their needs?
If I need more, I can reduce it. We're limiting it to 12. These are buses that usually hold 75 people, just for spacing purposes, and the 1 para for those 12 students is typically what we do on our type 2 buses, 10 to 12 students. If I need another para on a bus, then I have to reduce the number of kids on the bus, because we want to keep the number of people on the bus as limited as we can for the health and safety issues of transmission.
And I just want to make sure I jotted down my notes correctly. We're 4 to 8 students and 2 to 3 adults based on the ratio of adults to students based on the para need, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Did anybody else have questions? I see, Barbara, you unmuted. Do you have a question?
No, I'm good.
So the next slide talks about our assessment unit. As most people here know, Connecticut does not do typically evaluations or PPTs during non-school days, and summer is considered a non-school period. So certainly Norwalk did not do evaluations or PPTs except in very unusual circumstances. However, we recognize that there are approximately 120 either reevaluations or initial evaluations that we could not do during March, April, May, and June because we couldn't see the kids face to face for some of the evaluations. Where we could do some screeners and some other kinds of assessments, like, for example, a Vineland, which is a questionnaire, we did that work. However, the face-to-face evaluation needed to be put on hold. So we are planning a very robust evaluation unit over the summer. We're going to be using the literacy clinic as the site of the evaluation. We don't want kids coming in a day or two into every building where there are lots of kids, just for tracing purposes. So we looked at that space. The space is big enough to accommodate 4 testing rooms with just the evaluator and the student. We did buy, we found plexiglass corrals with hand holes so that a psychologist could be working on one side of the plexiglass corral, the child on the other, because we're closer than 6 feet. And the psychologist can put the materials in front of the child, watch the child do, for example, the block design, and then remove the materials and then clean them fully for next use. So we were really happy to find that. We also found masks with clear mouth so that a student can, watch the facial expression during the assessment and also during instruction. We're going to be using that, for several kids as well. The preschool evaluations will be done at NECC. We'll use one classroom, deep cleansing, and the preschoolers will go to NECC, and the school age students that require assessments will be done at the clinic. Obviously by appointment only, no visitors in the building. We'll greet the child at the front door and we'll ask the parent to come back. We're not going to have families waiting inside. We're really trying to minimize the health risks. We'll be able to do some of our specialized assessments there. And we're hoping to be able to get through the majority of our evaluations and schedule PPTs over the summer on those evaluations so that we open school with IEPs in place and without a backlog of 2019-20 evaluations to do while we're looking at the 2021 evaluations in front of us. Of course, all of this is pending the final discussions with the health department. Again, the evaluation unit, we can't socially distance. We can't test a child on an 8-0 6 feet away. So it's higher precaution. We've ordered shields and gloves, and it'll be highest precaution. And we're working closely with the professional organizations, including National ASHA and School Psych Association, to ensure that testing under these conditions is interpreted so that we can assure standardization and validity and reliability of our results. So if there are any questions about the evaluation unit, we can stop now before I get.
I have a question, Ms. Gorovich.
Sure.
Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
So my question is in regard to the evaluation unit. My son, for one, and I know of other families as well, who their triennial evaluations were never able to be completed during the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Is this an opportunity for those types of evaluations to be concluded as well, so we don't get too many months in between beginning and ending of these reviews?
That's exactly the children that we are planning
Okay.
on evaluating. There are a handful of initial evaluations that we've had PPT 1s on that we will do, but the great majority are the triennials that you've just described.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Okay. So let me go into the health precautions. So this is the checklist. Sorry for that being so small, but this is the checklist that the districts needed to submit if they were going to be doing any in-person opening of school, either summer academy or ESY, any in-person. This form was submitted by the superintendent, and it's pending at the State Department of Education. Number 5, and I'm going to go into detail, really are the health and safety factors. The rest of it talks about, equity issues and are we ensuring full access for kids with disabilities or language minority, if we or high risk kids, if we are opening school for anyone, and of course we are. But number 5 is the health and safety. So if we go to the next slides, I will walk through where we are at there. So the first issue is density. So it's density of kids in any classroom. And I've already reviewed that on previous slides. Should we make this larger? I mean, we can minimize.
It's okay.
You can see it? Okay. And we're also staggering some arrival times and planning for outdoor activities, not playground activities, because we can't assure the health and safety using, swings and gym equipment that lots of kids touch. But certainly any classes that can be done outside, weather permitting, we will do. We've been really creative. We've purchased, for example, hula hoops and pool noodles and kiddie pools, and lo and behold, they all have a span of 6 feet, either diameter or span. So that'll help us with the physical distancing. Our really young kids can do some work instead of at the rug without boundaries. Inside a kiddie pool, we can bring it outside without water, weather permitting, but it gives some boundaries in a more relaxed way. Bathrooms will be very closely supervised. We're talking about closing off the urinals, only one child in a class at a time. And of course, I will get to the hand washing protocols. There are no materials sharing. We've put in bulk orders. So each child will have their own separate box of materials. And the same materials will be used to the extent that it's appropriate for IEP needs if a child is learning at home or in school. So, the manipulatives, the calculators in middle school, you understand what I'm saying, whatever materials are being used, each child will have their own set of materials, no sharing. As I said, staggered entry and dismissal. All students riding the bus, temperature will be taken before they board the bus, as long as they meet the health requirements that I will get into in a moment. We will allow the child to board the bus. Children that are walking or being driven to school, we will take temperature before they enter the building, and everyone will be health screened. There are 3 questions that must be answered every day, within the past 24 hours. Temperature below 100. It was the same thing that was discussed last night at curriculum, Barbara. No evidence of coughs or shortness of breath, and sore throat. Each school will have an isolation room that will be staffed by a health para or a health aide. Each building will have hand washing stations open. We will be using classrooms with bathrooms and sinks to the greatest extent possible. We do have that luxury in the summer since we're using fewer classrooms. We're going to engineer the classrooms so that they all look very much alike, with tape on the floor, desks placed inside the tape, so we can assure the 6 feet for safety purposes. Plexiglass guards will be in the main office, and plexiglass cubes that I've already discussed for any one-on-one work. In terms of PPE, all staff will be provided with 3 cloth masks. We do anticipate people wash it like a uniform. All students will be provided with cloth masks as well. Staff working in close proximity to children, or with high management children that may require closer proximity. Staff will also be wearing a shield. Gowns, gloves, face shields will be provided with for any staff member working with children that are focusing on daily living skills, toileting needs, or any contact with bodily fluids. We are, taking those extra health precautions. Next, okay. All staff and all students must complete the self-assessment, asking the questions I just noted. Cohorts of students and staff will remain constant. So this is your pod of 5 kids for 5 weeks, and this is your teacher and your para, and we're not going to be departmentalizing so that we can maintain that. Everyone must sign in daily. Student attendance will be taken, temperature taken prior to boarding or entering the building. We're talking about anyone showing signs of possible infection. We're working with the health department to see if we can require a negative COVID prior to returning. That's still an open item that we are discussing with the health department. We're talking about training staff to be contact tracers. And we will be doing this training in consultation with the health department. Also confirming the clear communication about should someone test positive, doing that contact tracing. Do we close the class? Do we close the building? That will be done in consultation with the health department. We're hoping that that does not happen, but we need to plan for it in case it does. I spoke about the daily assessment. There will be a nurse on site in every building, and the nurse can do an additional assessment if needed. Visitors are prohibited from entering buildings. The screenings, as I already said, will be done at the door or before boarding the bus. We will be calling any staff or student who is absent to ensure why they are out. It could be they just, needed to be out for personal reasons, or maybe they had a stomach bug or sprained an ankle, not related. But if anyone is showing signs, we will require, clearance from either their treating physician or a negative COVID test if it appears to be a likely COVID incident. Hand washing protocols will be in place. Children will wash upon entering the building. They will wash several times during the day, certainly upon return from any bathroom or outdoor activity. Hand washing stations to the greatest extent possible within the classrooms we are using, and hand sanitizers available throughout the building. Cleaning and infecting, it shouldn't say infection, it should be disinfecting. Custodians will do a deep clean and every night. If buses are going to be used for 2 runs, an early and a late, buses will be deep cleaned before the second run. And high touch and bathrooms will be cleaned several times throughout the day. And I think that's it. Stace, is that the last? One more. Transportation, I've already described it. So a student would sit in a row, the next row will be empty. The next student will sit in the next row, 2 rows over on the other side, and that zigzag formation will be adhered to on the bus. Alternating rows. Children cannot sit in the same row unless they are sibs or living in the same household. I should say that we've had a couple of requests to pick up and drop off children from daycare, and we are going to refuse to do that for health purposes, because kids in congregate care outside their home would be in 2 deep pods, and that increases rate of possible transmission. So in those instances, we're talking to families about doing online ESY. And the staffing you see, I've already gone through that. And again, reduced numbers of students should increased numbers of staff be required in the room. So that is our plan as of today at midday. We are having a meeting tomorrow that will include the health department to talk about training of staff on universal precaution in the time of COVID, as well as to formalize protocols around closing schools or classrooms and COVID testing availability should that hopefully unlikely occurrence happen. So if there are any questions, I will answer them now.
Okay. I'll kick off. Let me just make sure nobody else has questions here. Okay. I'll kick off. Have we taken into account the amount of time that it's going to take for parents to answer questions or even students to answer questions prior to getting on the bus? In addition to the fact that we're pooling kids from all over the city to one bus site, the time on the bus is obviously a big concern of mine with Sped children.
So first on the questions, we'll be asking the kids the first day, and we'll be handing them the questionnaire to self-report thereafter. So we're not going to be, it's just the first day to sort of explain to each parent, of course, socially distanced, and thereafter we expect to have the protocol in place. Parent comes, hands it's a 3-question, it's yes or no to 3 questions. Hands it to the bus monitor, who will be trained as one of the health aides in the building. We'll scan, we're doing the infrared scanning of temperature, and then the child can either board the bus or go home with the parent should one of those questions be answered in the affirmative or a child has temp above 100. I will get the bus runs next week, and if there's anything that's a really long ride, we'll take appropriate action. I don't anticipate a problem there, given the few the limited numbers of kids we're transporting and the number of buses that we have available to us.
Okay, and should it be an older Sped child who does not have their parent with them boarding that bus, there obviously will be protocols in place if they do get turned away to contact their parents and let them know that okay. There's been a lot of conversation around Sped students not tolerating masks. What is the protocol for children who won't wear a mask or will take it off in the middle, and what is the plan for how our teachers will tackle that?
I'm taking the following approach. We would not say to a child who is not yet toilet trained because of a disability that you can't come to school, but it doesn't negate our responsibility to work with families to attempt to toilet train and schedule that child, because it's an issue of independence and it's a skill. And I look at these health precautions in a similar way. So we wear masks not to protect the child or to protect ourselves, but to protect everybody else that child is coming in contact with. And we have written social stories. We have asked the BCBAs to begin working with the children in anticipation of their return, because we know that we can't train a child with sensitivities, or a young child, or anyone, within 1 hour of them arriving, in our schools, in our classrooms. So we're working on that. There is an exception procedure that we are finalizing. It will require a medical exception. And we're trying to keep it minimal, again, because we want to keep our staff and our kids as safe as possible. We will not get into full discipline if a kid can't keep on a mask. We will teach a child how to safely do that to the greatest extent possible. And should there be an exception to wearing a mask, the staff working with that child will be in full PPE protection, including the face shield. We're going to have to sensitize kids to what that's going to look like as well. So this is a heavy lift. We're trying to keep it to a minimum. That's one of the reasons why we kept the preschool to 2 hours, because we just didn't think we were going to get into a successful 3-hour safe protocol with the really young kids. So there is an exception procedure. We're working it out, and it'll be on a case-by-case basis. And it will need medical, documentation that says there's a pre-existing health or medical risk.
Okay, and then my last question was, should someone test positive? Do we know the protocols yet? Like, does everyone in that classroom
So
have to switch to remote learning?
Should someone test positive, contact tracing happens immediately. So not only everyone in that classroom. I can't now. Everyone in that class will be advised, and we will go into we will I'm sorry.
That's okay. And you know what? I should have clarified my question when you come back on. If someone has a fever, it doesn't have to test positive. If there's any exposure.
Let me just take care of this. Stacy, do you want to pick this up? Okay. And I will be right.
Go ahead, and if you want to continue your clarification, Erica.
Sure. So I shouldn't have said a positive test. So any risk of exposure, high temp, will the other students and parents be notified? And what is the process? Are we switching to remote learning at that point? If you could just expand on what the considerations are at that point.
So yeah, so I know that they've been, Dr. Costanzo and Yvette have been working with the health department to come up with a set of procedures around that. Specifically looking at getting clearance from a doctor if a student is sick, kind of going back to what Yvette was saying earlier about if a student is absent, why are they absent? So following up, so often a child could have a fever and not actually test positive. So that's part of the procedures being developed. And should a child have a fever but not be a COVID positive student, what those next steps would be.
So to return, I'm sorry about that. To return to school, we would need clearance from the treating physician if a child was showing a fever. If a child was, if there was a positive, then we would follow evacuation protocols.
The other children in the class, though, if there was potential for them to be exposed, we'll notify them and give them the opportunity
Absolutely.
to move to a remote learning. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Exactly, Erica. Exactly.
Okay.
And
I see Barb. Go ahead. Sorry.
And
I was going to say, I saw Barbara unmuted, so she may have a question too.
If there is a positive, we would need to follow the health department protocols, close the building or the classroom, depending upon the tracing outcome. And we would require a negative before returning back to school on whoever tested positive.
Thank you. Barbara, did you have a question as well?
It wasn't a question so much as, as we're advocating for all of this, we know we're waiting for the health department's approval, and we've definitely done a lot of work since the last time we saw this information, and that will helps to have everybody feel more comfortable. If it does come to a situation where the health department isn't feeling comfortable, I hope that the people in the room can advocate to consider doing ESY, even if we can't do summer academy, because from what I'm hearing from these families, the ones who are opting in are doing so because they're really desperate.
Exactly.
And so my hope is that Dr. Adamowski and Dr. Estrella can at the very least advocate for these children who desperately need in-person support.
From an equity standpoint, we would prioritize our special needs students as well as our youngest learners to ensure that that gap doesn't widen, and remembering that our youngest students had the least access to robust online learning because it was, a later rollout. Absolutely. I do believe, based upon my reading of the room, that administration is prepared to move forward. The health department does not need to approve the plan. It's the plan that's submitted to the State Department of Health, to the State Education Department. But we, of course, are working in close collaboration with our local health department. We wouldn't do anything that would place the community at high risk, based upon the health experts in the room.
That is an interesting answer. So you're suggesting that the State Department of Education has more authority over our use of the schools than our city?
No, I'm suggesting that if you go back 3 slides or 4 slides, Stacy, I'm suggesting that the checklist and the confirmation comes from administration to the State Department of Education. Obviously, the city and the local health department can close everything, should, God forbid, we need to roll back the phasing of our community.
I'm heartened by the lower number of new cases and hospitalizations that we're experiencing, and I'm really hoping that means that our community has been smart and safe, and hopefully we can start getting back to learning. So,
and as I said at the very, very beginning, this is the balancing act. The health and safety of our community, our kids, and our staff, with the desperate need for direct service delivery for a group of children.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Does anyone else on the committee have questions? Just scroll over. Okay. Okay, with that, I'll move on to the next item on the agenda. It's our last item. I asked you that to speak a bit about our social justice initiative specific to Sped.
So again, as I said, children with disabilities are general education children first. And our protocols and our issues of social justice and issues related to just equity and implicit bias, as it exists in our communities across the nation. We know Norwalk is a microcosm of the nation. It exists in every room of our house. It exists in our schoolhouses. So what we are seeing, and we are acutely aware of at this current point in time, is a reflection of the larger system. But having said that, I recognize the sensitivities that exist at a PPT table, or the sensitivities that exist when parents and staff are talking about a child with a disability. That, all of the sensitivities are heightened. And I think we need to be aware of that. So we begin with the data that we have available, and then we go on with what do we do about it. Understanding we're going to do a really deep dive on some of the questions. When we do that audit, this committee asked for information about, for example, is there a discrepancy based upon race when children are initially referred for services? Is there a discrepancy based upon other risk factors, language, second language families, or families living in poverty, with regard to how integrated or restrictive their child's program is? And what are the conversations having around the PPT table? I know that there are members of our community that report additional stressors because of who families are in an already stressful situation. I think we need to own that and take steps to remediate. So here's the data that's immediately available to us. Stacy, do you want to talk about how the state collects data on disproportionality?
Sure. So the state looks at 3 areas of disproportionality. They look at overall identification. They look at and identification in different categories. They look at the time students are out of general education, and then they look at discipline data. They look at how often students are suspended or expelled. So most recently, the state was looking at the 2017-18 school year data. So during the course of this 19-20 school year, we were looking at our 2017-18 school years. So the 2 areas that were identified as areas to complete a district self-assessment. So this has not been, we're only in a self-assessment because this is the first year that this data popped up as a disproportionate. So it hasn't been a historical data point. This was the first time it went over the benchmarks in 2017-18. And the first was looking at the disproportionality of suspensions and expulsions of students with disabilities who were identified as Black. What I do want to note, and as Yvette has said, is that this was in proportion with the entire district, in that the suspensions and expulsions, and this is for students that were over 10 days or more, is what this particular area was looking at. And so this was consistent with the district-wide data, as well as with our students with disability. The other area that the state identified was that students who were represented were identified as students with intellectual disabilities, were also identified as Black, the state looks at any data that comes over 3%. So in this case, that Norwalk was at 4%, 4.8%. in the number of students that we have identified as students with intellectual disabilities that are also categorized as Black. So what the response of the district was to complete a self-assessment in disproportionality to see if we could identify, are there any systematic issues within the school district and how we assess or how we progress, how we use discipline in order, is there anything systematic that is impacting this data? So for the suspension and expulsion, we worked in collaboration with Sandra Theos and Dr. Costanzo to look at the data and the processes and procedures within the general ed, because that's where the discipline comes out of. And what I can say is that even since this data was reported, I can't make predictions about 18-19, but I do know that as we looked at 19-20, we started putting in new processes and procedures in place to look at alternatives to suspension and expulsion in terms of restorative practices. And so even within looking at that, there's been a change of practice since this was since this data has come out. We also looked at, manifestations, determinations, and the teams as they, identify is the behavior related to the student's disability. And so when we went through all that, through the data, we see that that we need to have a greater awareness of students' behavior and context and cultural understanding, but that we are making as a district strides in coming up with other things to do other than suspensions and expulsions. And I think that's really the key. And that is something the state has been working on over the last 2 or 3 years, is looking at and saying, you need to, for students, we need to have a different way of discipline than progressive discipline. You need to look at restorative practices and how are you implementing that. When we looked at our disproportionate for students as represented for intellectual disability, we did look at the evaluations and we did look at the files of those students and our processes and procedures in that identification process. We did not see any systematic issues in terms of the identification. The students who are identified as intellectual disability do follow the checklist. So the state of Connecticut does have a checklist in order to determine whether or not what categories a child might be eligible in, and that we did follow those eligibility criteria. So we do, I think, have work in terms of global training, and I have a slide on kind of like next steps and things we're going to do. But in looking at the self-assessments, the district is definitely on the right track in terms of practices that we're looking at in terms of identification of students for disabilities. I did just want to kind of show these are all of the areas that the state does look at for disproportionality. So as I said, there's the overall identification. So they look at all disabilities. So do you just have a higher rate of identification statewide? And then in specific categories, intellectual disability, specific learning disability, emotional disturbance, speech and language, other OHI, other health impairment, and autism. They also look at the placement. So how often are students not in regular education? And so that's another area that they look at disproportionality. So do you have a higher disproportionate of students who are out of general education or sent to separate schools? And then the last one is the discipline. So looking at, who are the students who are receiving discipline, less than 10 days, more than 10 days, out of school, in school suspension. So those are all the areas that the state does look at when identifying any kind of disproportionality issues. So as a result of
Stacey, if you could just go back one slide for a moment, I just wanted to make a comment. I continue to be very concerned with regard to the disciplinary issue. And while the discipline rates are going down, the numbers of kids with disabilities that are being disciplined is remaining fairly constant. So everything is going down, but kids with disabilities is not going, disciplinary for kids with disabilities is not going down more than anyone else. And I think we need to do a lot of work there, and that will be a goal certainly to work with the new administration around issues related to restorative practices, issues related to proactive social emotional work and counseling work, and partnering with our community-based organizations. I mean, it's a deep dive that we're prepared to do, but we recognize it needs to be done.
And do we feel that, that number going down, how much of it has to do with the methodology and the reporting versus it actually going down?
I think it's going down because we are doing some of the restorative practice work. So before the knee-jerk response of you're out for 5 days, 3 days, whatever it is, people are attempting to to restore those relationships before they move to discipline.
And when do we
I
get
do see that happening.
when do we get the 1819 report?
I believe that these came out in November, December of 2019.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So some of the things that we are, that we have done and that we are looking at implementing as well, we were in the process prior to COVID, is doing the CERC's 8-day PPT training for administrators. And in that training, which the part that was completed, actually there was a section on both discipline and identification. So bringing in and talking about how do you determine discipline, and how do you, what are the considerations for identification? So that is something we are looking, and I've talked to CERC that we wanted to restart up our 8-day PPT training, in addition to do another cohort as well. Right now they're looking at how to move that into more of an online hybrid model. So that they can, institute this in the school. So we're still looking at continuing that as we come back to school next year. We also did a file review. So looking at student files, again, how are students being identified for disabilities? Are we using the checklist? Do we have the data to support that? As well as we're doing some of the discipline, when we are going over 10 days, or if there is an expulsion, there is a mandatory manifestation determination. So again, do we have the manifestation? Is there data to support the team's decision? So we did some random samples of files to ensure that we do have those processes in place. And so really that leads us to, if we're doing the processes correctly, what are some of the other things that we need to do that then impact our practice? Because, how do we look at testing and identification? And what are the implicit biases as we are doing some of the testing and identification? I can say from personal experience, it was somewhat of a shock coming to Connecticut for testing from California, because for intellectual disabilities, for students who are African American, you cannot use an IQ test. That is a law in California because of that implicit bias in some of the testing and the cultural norms. So, they're definitely, I think, look at some of that training that we need to work with our school psychologists to ensure that. We also need to look at additional anti-bias training for all of, not just our psychologists in testing, but all of our staff, our teachers, our paras, and really working with them on understanding our students, their families, the community, what some behaviors you may think are disrespectful, aren't disrespectful. Like, how are you, some of the activities we ask, are they really culturally appropriate for students? So really looking at that anti-bias. And when I finish, I'm going to show you some resources that I put together that we've shared with staff to then share with some of our principals. Also, we're working with CERC to do some more targeted training on running PPTs and communication with parents. So I think that it's really important that staff set up a good process and a good way to communicate with parents when you're at that PPT, that it's a conversation. This just isn't a requirement of doing a PPT once a year. This is a time to really celebrate the strengths of the student and to talk about the challenges, but to also look at what are the priorities of the family, especially when you are looking at students who start having transition age, and then at transition age, and you're doing transition plans, not what is the school's goal, but what are the family's goal? What does that mean in the context of their community? So I think that's another area that we're going to look at, as well as culturally responsive teaching practices. So really working with our staff and, what is appropriate, where is, and it goes back to some of that, anti-bias training, that I think there are many activities that teachers did, they were asked to do with students, and they've carried those on, not even realizing where the bias might be in those particular activities. And so working with teachers in understanding and being able to help them have some culturally responsive teaching practices. So those are some of the areas that we want to focus on within both the bigger context of the district, as well as within our department of things that we need to look at for that.
Stacey, can you flip back to the first slide again?
Mm-hmm.
So in both areas that are benchmarked, in 17 and 18, we were reported to be above what's considered a relative risk factor. But you anticipate that the controls that were put in place in response to that report are going to drop us below the benchmarks. And that report will be out in November and December.
So some of the practices, such as the restorative practice, were really put into place in this 1920 school year. So I don't know whether because we'll be getting 18-19. So I would hope that we have seen data go down. And remember, this is a percentage as opposed to the number of cases. So I am hoping that we will see a decrease in 18-19, but I know that some more specific practices around discipline happen to go into place more systematically this year, this 19-20, as a whole. So we won't get that data for another 2 years or another year and a half.
So this is obviously, it's alarming, and obviously that, based on the protocols that are now being put into place. So I would hope that this is something that we can revisit as part of the retreat and make the larger board, aware of, what was and, what should be based on all of the new efforts that have been implemented over the past year and a half.
Mm-hmm. I know that this will be a large scale priority for the new administration.
Okay.
And again, each one of us each one of us in a leadership role needs to take responsibility for that leadership in this area. But again, I think that this is reflective of larger systems discussions. Understanding that what happens at a PPT table is magnified because of the sensitivities around what we're discussing.
So I do want to share a document. So I'm going to try to flip over to a new one. Okay, everybody see that? So this is a document that, I have to say I've been very lucky to attend universities that are actually very progressive in some of the work that's coming out right now. I'm doing my undergrad at Boston University that's actually starting an anti-racism center, and so some resources as well as Saybrook. And so putting this together that we've sent out to the cabinet, as well as asking to send out to principals, some podcasts and videos that staff can view, as well as some scaffolding in terms of teaching activities. Also a list of books and readings that they can use to start discussions, and then some articles to do that, as well as just kind of looking at the S-Quad model in terms of developing a model for conversation, which I think is also very important. How to have these conversations is often difficult, so having that ability and outline to do that, as well as some other resources in talking with young children, how to talk about racism with young children. I think often we need to start very young, and just tools to do that, and then also just some historical works to look and some for curriculum. So we've been working with this, sending this out, to our staff, we have been working with our, Maureen with the social emotional learning, and Yvette's been with the counselors and the GT, looking at the summer project and the diversity. So we've really tried to do some wraparound with the district. So not just special education, but as the district as a whole, because I think that that is part of our responsibility when we look at social justice. And, it might start out of, these are our students with disabilities, but it's really they're part of a larger community. And we need to look at that within that context. So we are here to help and support the district in that initiative.
Thank you, Stacy.
Barbara, I saw that you unmuted. Did you have a comment?
At first, I wanted to request, Stacy, can you send these presentations? I don't know that we got all of them in the materials to the committee. And I guess I thought this was great as a first wave of how we approach, but I want to lean in one more time into our child find and the data around when we're identifying children who are minorities. I keep coming back, and I hate to single out one building, but I keep coming back to the statistics for Jefferson. 94% minority, 74% free and reduced lunch, and only 10% identified SPED, which is so much below the national average. So I think we need to lean into child find, and we need to do it now as quickly as possible, because when it comes to a child, every day of development is a lost day if we're not mitigating and intervening. And I know that everybody on this call feels that way. And I don't know if it's resources. So let's find the resources. If we need to find a partner to help us get there, let's do that. Whatever we need to do, we need to move forward on this issue as one of the top priorities of our district, in my opinion. I'm going to get off my soapbox now. And you're all doing great work. I just want to say that
Erica, Roland just said he needed to stop the
Yeah.
YouTube live, so I just want to let the committee know. Barbara, I think it's a very gentle balance between false negatives and false positives, between over-identification and late child find. And, that is the work that we need to focus on every day. I recently put together some declassification data, for you. It was a request of one of the board members. It's something that we're going to have to look at deeply. Those rates are very low nationally. But the earlier a child is identified, those small numbers of children are declassified. The later a child is identified, the longer they need service. So, I mean,
so we can save money by identifying early. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, well, we'll continue this conversation. We do have to adjourn because the IT team needs this YouTube link. So can I have a motion to
So
adjourn?
moved.
Okay. Okay, so second, and we're gonna all in favor of that. Barbara and I, okay. Thank you very much to the team who put together all the materials tonight and presented this evening, and to the Sped PAC committee. And for all of you who are joining us as part of the ad hoc committee, do, as Eric mentioned, continue to solicit feedback from the community and encourage them to reach out to us and to report their needs and their positives. And thank you again for everybody's time this evening.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you, Stacy.